pop up and the headlines and the campaign slogans. And what we wanted to do today was for some of those of us that have not lived in Alameda since birth or since before my birth, to find out exactly what is Measure A. Some people think it's the school bond we just passed. Some people think it's the hospital bond. So we wanted to have this meeting and try and educate those of us in our club to find out more about it and to find out exactly where each side is coming from. And with that, I hope that we can respect each other's opinion. We have two very distinguished speakers that are going to speak to us today. So let's please be respectful of them and their opinions. And if not, it will be on YouTube, and then the whole world will notice. So hopefully that will help. Our speaker that's going to be pulling actually double duty today, former council member Barbara Kerr. We all remember Barbara's tenure on the city council, and I think everyone always thought that she was always the best prepared and most prepared. So I'm sure that she's best prepared and most prepared to handle this as well. For those that don't know anything about Councilmember Kerr, she's lived in Alameda since 1969, right? So quite many years. She was the first woman to work for GE's reactor physics labs in Schenectady, and has her graduate of Cornell, where she majors in physics. And as those of you probably know, again, nothing insulting, but back then, for a woman to get into college and for a woman to graduate in such a prestigious field from a prestigious university, I think we should give a lot of credit for that. A trailblazer back then, and a trailblazer here in Alameda. So, we welcome you and thank you for coming and speaking to us today. On the side that is going to advocate not keeping Measure A exactly the way it is, we have Helen Sause, and she's actually lived here since 1964. So we have two longtime Alameda residents, and I think this shows that you can live here for a long time and still have a difference of opinion on a very important issue. Helen worked for the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency for 34 years. If you've been downtown and seen the Moscone Center, the Yerba Buena Center, that's her handiwork. She was the project manager for almost 17 years on that project, so she's very familiar with issues surrounding development and residential and urban issues and how they interact and how they mesh. So she also has experience in Oregon and also down in Seaside. So we all know that's a pleasant community to visit as well. So Helen was also chair of the Alameda's Economic Development Commission and has served as vice chair of the Base Reuse Advisory Group. So we have two very well-respected, very experienced individuals going to give us their opinions on this. And like I said, Barbara's doing double duty, so she's going to give us a short history on what it was like on the island back when Measure A was passed, because I wasn't here, and I think a lot of us weren't here, and we want to learn about, why are we at where we are today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Thank you. Can you project or do you need the microphone?
I'll use the microphone.
Okay.
And, no, I have a soft voice, but thank you for the nice introduction. And I left my gun at home, and I hope you all did too. So we should have a nice, quiet meeting.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Okay. Tonight in this history, I'm going to cover the reasons for the passage of Measure A, the text of Measure A, and the effects of Measure A. Can you hear me now?
No. You need to speak up.
I can speak right into it. How's this?
Much better.
Okay. In this history tonight, I'm going to cover the reasons for the passage of Measure A, the text of Measure A, and the effects of Measure A. Because that's what I was asked to do. The reasons for the momentum to pass Measure A. The most common reason given for the success of Measure A at the ballot in 1973 is the demolition of Victorians. But actually, a lot of houses were coming down besides Victorians. And that wasn't the only reason. There were actually three main movements in 1973, which brought the ballot, the success of the ballot. Okay, slide 1. The first reason just mentioned was the destruction of many different kinds of housing in Alameda, not just Victorians, and that was for the purpose of building stucco apartment boxes. There was one house being torn down every 5 days. The second reason was the proposal by developer Ron Cowan and Doric Development to build over 10,000 dwelling units at what is now known as Harbor Bay Isle. And the third reason was the strong Save the Bay sentiment that had built up due to the fact that over 1/3 of the bay had already been filled by developers, and the fill of the bay in Alameda along the south shore of the island was one of the latest loss of bay water, which had caused outrage among people who lived in the bay and who lived in Alameda. It should be emphasized that the backers put a charter amendment on the ballot rather than an initiative for an ordinance, because they had stopped trusting the city council. So let's look at some examples of the demolitions and their effects around Alameda. Next. This Victorian on Alameda Avenue survived the demolition around it. It has been beautifully restored. We have to move this. Okay. Next slide. This building replaced the house next to the Victorian that we just showed. This slab-sided structure is between 2 Victorians. And so you can see how this kind of demolition and replacement was changing our neighborhoods. Next slide. This red house, which is not a Victorian, has also been threatened by ongoing demolitions. On the right side of the screen, you can see this house had its neighbor replaced by a stucco apartment building and garage doors facing the street. Next slide. This small, affordable houses like this were also threatened. Please notice the big stucco apartment house next door on the left side of the screen. Next slide. These 6 cottages are all owned separately. Each is on its own fee simple lot. Small, affordable cottages like this could be built in a Measure A compliant way with a few extra square feet. At Alameda Point, if we could get a city council to demand it. Now the second source, the second part of the movement was those 10,000 or 11,000, I've heard both, that Ron Cowan proposed to build out on Bay Farm Island. Bay Farm Island is a peninsula with little road access, and there are only about 25,000 dwelling units on private property in Alameda at the time. So you can see why an increase of 10,000 raised a lot of alarm. The third reason was the bay fill. And this shows one of the apartments on our shoreline, our southern shoreline. The fill of the South Shore was done for the purpose of a shopping center, many apartment and condominium buildings, and some single-family dwellings. The apartment wall that appeared on the shore was not welcome. Next slide. And these apartment buildings didn't have front lawns, but they did have garage entrances. And we ended up with a view of a lot of concrete parking lots. So what is Measure A? That was the one thing I was asked to talk about. Measure A is that part of our city charter known as Article 26. It was passed in not one vote, but 2 separate sections and 2 separate votes. Next slide. This was the part that was passed in 1973. The first part is the famous multiple dwelling units, one that everybody talks about. And actually, multiple family dwellings was not defined in the charter. It was later defined by the City Council in an ordinance in Chapter 30 of our MMC. But I want to emphasize that Measure A is part of our city charter. It's Article 26, and anybody who wants to know anything about it can go online to the city's website and click on it and read it. Next slide. This is the second part of Measure A, and it was passed in 1991. And this is the one that's known as the requirement that there be at least 2,000 square feet of lot area per dwelling unit. And the exception listed is that existing multifamily dwellings may be replaced if they are destroyed by fire or other disaster. This is another thing that I hear about Measure A. It prevents the rebuilding of apartment buildings. Actually, I've heard more versions of Measure A in the last 2 months than Carter has bills. The Journal reported, I was going down to the library and reading on the microfilm, and the Journal reported that this ballot Measure A passed by a vote of 4-1. It needs to be pointed out that this vote was 16 years ago. The opponents of Measure A keep telling people that the last vote was 34 years ago. And another thing is Measure A has been challenged at the ballot box once. In 1984, a confirming vote called the Red Brick Building vote. The developer of Marina Village wanted an exception so they could put multiple apartments in an existing building. And that's why it's called the Red Brick Building vote. This attempt to amend Measure A failed by quite a margin. So let's look. The third thing I'm going to talk about, what are the effects of Measure A? Next slide. What comes up when people talk about Measure A? Affordability, open space, and diversity. That's the next slide. The claim is often made that high density leads to affordability. So let's look at some high density projects just across the estuary in Oakland. This loft project is near the Amtrak station. It's a rental project. The rent started at $1,895 per month for studios and go up to $2,500 per month for a 2-bedroom. Next slide. This is a converted warehouse in the same neighborhood. And the prices here, these are for purchase, and the prices are $695,000 per unit. Next slide. This is Harbor Walk, and it's on Glasscock Street. For those of you who don't know, you can go across the Park Street Bridge and turn right on the first street, you're on Glasscock. The unit price for a bedroom here is a bit lower. It's $595,000. Now the second thing that people, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but there hasn't been any open space that you can see around these units. By the way, Oakland does not require developer fees from the developers the way Alameda does. We are very forward in that, and that we do require that people develop here do pay impact fees. Next slide. Okay. High density does not produce open space, as we have seen in the last 3 slides. However, Measure A compliant developments have produced open space. Few people realize that all of Harbor Bay Isle is Measure A compliant. This shows the double trails that rim Harbor Bay Isle shoreline. There are great bay views, also scattered picnic areas, places to sit and gather. Next slide. This is a pocket park out at Harbor Bay Isle. There are many pocket parks all over the isle, and it's usually attached to a lagoon as shown here. They are paid for with private money, but accessible and usable by the public, and they are a joy. By the way, Harbor Bay Isle is up to state standards on park area per resident. Next slide. Frank should recognize this one. This is the housing development in Marina Village. It's Measure A compliant, has clustered open space, shoreline access, and great waterfront views. Next slide. This is a shoreline park that was developed and paid for by Kaufman and Broad as part of their entitlement to build a housing development along Buena Vista near Grand. There is a play park for small children at the right. You can just see the fence around there. And there is a grassy park at the far end. And this is a good addition to our shoreline trail system. Not many people know about this, but I suggest that you go down to the end of Peru and take a look, because it's a very pleasant stroll. And we didn't have to pay for it. Next slide. This is the path along shoreline. So non-Measure A development does not always produce nice bike trails and other amenities. This is shoreline access in a non-Measure A fill development. Okay, well, the third issue that keeps coming up is diversity. And some claim that Measure A discourages minority populations from living in Alameda. In Alameda, the 1980 census had the white population at 79%. The 1990 census had the white population at 70%. And in the 2000 census, it was down to 54.6%. So the percentage has been getting smaller all the time. So Measure A not only doesn't prevent diversity, but it looks like ethnic diversity flourishes very well with Measure A. And in the 2000 census, the average age in Alameda was 38 years. So the general picture that they're all just old folks like myself living here is incorrect. So I want to finish off by summarizing. Next slide. So the destruction of homes, we want to note that one disappeared every 5 days. And Measure A actually saved all types of homes in their neighborhoods, not just expensive Victorians, but the little guys as well. The proposal to build over 10,000 units on Bay Farm Island by Ron Cowan and Doric Development, even the approximately 3,000 houses which were built, caused the construction of Constitution Way, which we didn't need before Harbor Bay Isle. The Atlantic extension between Webster and Sherman wasn't needed. And Fernside, Port Fernside, was a 2-lane dead-end street, very residential, very quiet, and to service the traffic going to Harbor Bay Isle, Fernside was turned into a through street and a 4-lane street. So in the last one, which people probably don't remember, but the Save the Bay movement was very strong in the 70s. And the tall apartments along the shoreline did cut off views and accessibility. Okay, the last slide. Affordability. I was on the council 8 years, and I can assure you only subsidies produced lower than market rate housing. Developers will build for maximum profit. As we saw in the Oakland high-density housing, they built to lot line. Open space, Measure A compliant developments do produce open space, as we have seen. Open space only happens when a city council requires it, which was why we required it for Kaufman and Broad, and for some reason the present city council did not require it for the Collins property. Other cities do require it all the time. Diversity, the diversity has increased while Measure A has been in effect. And don't forget filling in the bay. And by the way, my favorite comment is I like housing to be people-friendly, not bus-friendly. And I want to thank Joe Woodard, who has been running the PowerPoint for me, which I don't have PowerPoint. And Woodard Multimedia normally charges for its services, but they very kindly donated their service tonight for this Democratic Club meeting, so I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Joe.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me here to talk about the issues. We sort of just went down memory lane talking about the debate over Measure A's passage, and it really did divide people all over the island. Mayor LaCroix, as many of you will remember, was mayor then, and he and his wife practically split over that. One was on one side and one was on the other. It passed by a very resounding vote of 59%, and that was out of the frustration that people had over the city government not really adhering to what they would like to see and not having the restrictions that are now in place today over the demolition of Victorians and the other restrictions that guard against some of the things that we don't want to see happen in Alameda. Some of the nice buildings that we like, even ones in the slide, couldn't be built today. And unfortunately, if we look at what's going on in Alameda Point, the one model that we now have built, which is Bayport, the nice open space and the diversity of housing types, unfortunately doesn't exist, nor does it attract transportation that we'd like to see. But I really want to talk about the future. I don't want to dwell on the past. We need to learn from history. We need to review it. And then we need to look forward to what we're going to be doing in 2020 and beyond. Because this huge development was one of the things that was discussed at the time Measure A passed. The possibility of having the Navy base to develop and the northern waterfront to develop. We didn't even think about the new movie theater being closed. But anyway, those things came up during those discussions, and people were concerned about the applicability of the measure that was before them actually working for bigger developments like that. These infill issues that we're just looking at are certainly ones that are terrible, and the design is certainly nothing that anyone would want. But I'm going to talk about the vision for Alameda Point. It has such great potential. It's a third of the island. Those are positive things. It's prime location, and that's a positive thing. The challenges are that it is an island location. It is in the floodplain. The island location means there will always be a challenge to get people on and off the island. It's in the floodplain, which means that some of the land is so low that it will require fill in order to build and finance housing. It has a lot of dirty soil that's going to need to be cleaned up. And it has Measure A as a constraint, where you can't build more than 2 units. And those are things that we need to consider how to address. The ones I mentioned before Measure A are really ones that staff and our direction to the City Council, the ARA, can really take charge of and resolve. But the one that concerns Measure A and its restrictions is one that's within Alamedians' control, and we can mitigate that. The reuse goals in the community reuse plan and the general plan really talked about the city's exciting opportunity to develop a creative residential and commercial neighborhood at Alameda Point. It suggests that we should try and develop a variety of architecture, lot sizes, economic ranges of housing to achieve the type of seamless integration with old Alameda that everyone attending this public meetings has urged that we do. This is very plain. I walk in this neighborhood often, and you look at the small houses, you look at the large, wonderful Victorians, you look at everything in between, including retail, and you see the fabric of the Alameda that I love, and having Central Alameda in a modern way replicated at Alameda Point is a goal that I think everyone on the Reuse Commission wanted to see. We talked about this seamless integration constantly, and I would really like to ask if you feel that the Measure A compliant Bayport, if it looks like Alameda Point, looks like our historic Alameda. I don't think so. It's nice, but it doesn't resemble the historic Alameda that I believe we wanted to achieve when we worked on the reuse plan. Historic preservation is a challenge. With Measure A, buildings can be saved, but we don't have the ability to make them into small apartments for the seniors, to provide them as housing in any other form that has kitchens in it. And so those will likely be saved, but boarded up and not, unless we can find some other use for them. housing choices. When diversity is talked about, we have different ways of describing diversity. Housing choices, we speak of diversity as an organization as having, as we do on the main island, condos, townhomes, apartments, that young professionals, teachers, empty nesters needing to downsize can all have an opportunity to have access to. In addition, with a variety of housing types, it's easier to integrate low and moderate income housing that is required for Alameda Point in a variety of housing types, so that you don't just have people straining to buy a house, although it's major write-down of the cost. Straining to buy that house, you have people who can afford to rent an apartment. You may have someone that can afford a condo, but not a big single-family home. And so those are some of the things that we envisioned and some of the things that we wanted to see. We did talk about open space a lot and having it usable for housing in such a way that not just the nice shoreline park that our council has been good about trying to achieve and is on its way to doing, and big play spaces, but places in the neighborhoods, the pocket parks, and the desirable open space that we've talked about tonight as a goal that was part of Measure A's accomplishments. We need to see that. Transit hubs are something we didn't talk about. We favor having jobs, housing balance. It'd be wonderful if everyone that lived in Alameda could walk a half a mile to work, as they do in Marina Village, or bike, as some of them do. And it would be great to be able to have transit hubs that have a variety of housing types and density that would attract public transportation. So those are some of the goals that we wanted. We talked about stakeholders a lot, and the problem about not being able to build diverse multifamily housing affects stakeholders such as those in the workforce, the school district, families, transportation agencies, transportation-dependent people, businesses, recreational advocates, and historic preservationists. To really serve those, we need to find a way to lift the restrictions of Measure A just for Alameda Point, and that's the only advocacy of changing Measure A that Holmes has undertaken. One of the elements that we wanted to talk about also is the impact of the problems in adhering to Measure A. There's just fewer housing choices to buy or rent for families. There are fewer opportunities, as I mentioned, to incorporate subsidized units. The additional traffic caused by workers who choose to commute by car on and off the island, and studies show that single-family development will generate more car trips. There are fewer school-aged children in exclusive single-family homes, which result in impacting the school district's enrollment. Local businesses lose retail opportunity, on and on and on. So those kinds of impacts are caused by not being able to have a diverse, and I repeat the word diverse, in the sense that we need to have a diverse housing types to choose from. The things that I think would be desirable outcomes are ones that is, when you think of what impact Alameda Point has on all Alamedians, it's really significant throughout the Isle. People in Bay Farm Island may say, it doesn't bother me, why does this impact me? It's way out there, and people can struggle through the two, and it really isn't going to be something I'm going to work with. That is not the case. What happens at Alameda Point affects all of us. Alamedians need homes they can afford to buy or rent in a variety of sizes and price ranges. Many are seeking a neighborhood that would provide jobs, services, and economic opportunities, and development that increases our tax base for needed services. creation of a more usable open space, better transit opportunities, all of these things that would be an asset to us. And if you really think about the fact that you may be supporting a college-age child now, by the time this development is built, that youngster is going to be looking for a first home or an apartment. And it'd surely be nice to be able to accommodate them in Alameda. Maybe by then, we'll all be downsizing it, and it would be great for all of us to be able to stay in Alameda in a smaller home or an apartment. So Alameda Point matters to all of us, and I really hope that you will think about the ideas of changing Major A just for Alameda Point. Now, that's one point of view. There's a lot of information out there, and I hope that you will look at it. There's, as Barbara pointed out, information on the city website. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of articles that really could tell you more about what the effects of transit and single-family homes are, what it takes to make successful neighborhood economic development work. And so inform yourself and look at both sides of the issue. Homes is an organization of a few cross-section of the community. Many of us have lived there a long time. Many of us live in apartments. Some of us live in apartments. Some of us live in homes. Some of us are new to the island. We are a wide variety of people and backgrounds, but we do have a concern about Alameda Point because we know that it will impact all of us. There are upcoming meetings that you need to get on your calendar. The R is going to consider St. Cal again on the 18th of July. Planning Board is working on its forum, its impacts on Measure A. This will be on this coming Friday, the 13th of July. There's a transit study that's going on that's being done with transportation money. The WRT Solomon study that's going to look at transit in regard to Alameda Point's development, because development and transit go hand in hand. And we also want to push our website, which is www.homesalameda.org. And that has information on all these issues, as well as our monthly newsletter, the Homes Front. So with that, I'd really like to take your questions. What I wanted to hear tonight was maybe what your favorite neighborhood looks like, and questions that Barbara or I might be able to answer. So thank you very much for allowing me to come and share these thoughts.
How do you want to run it?
All the people have questions. So if you have questions for one person, then you can direct them to them. If you want both to address a certain issue, then you can address them to both. Hopefully, or we can pass it back and forth. No, I think we're just 15 minutes. So if you have questions, Rob or I will raise your hand, and we'll try and get as many as all of you as possible. So you can start.
Yeah. Go from Ms. Kerr or Helen. So I'm not clear what this means. Ms. Kerr, was on your slide. Only subsidies produce affordable housing. What does that mean? I'm sorry.
Can everybody hear the question? No.
Okay, the question was, only subsidies, my statement was only subsidies produce less than market rate housing. And is that, oh, here, okay. In fact, both the original DDA with Catullus Prologus and the provisional agreement that we have with the partners, which never panned out, they both required a standard amount of profit. 25% comes to mind. So when they produce below market rate housing and the inclusionary housing one, they don't make their 25%. And if they want to sell their houses, they may or may not get enough money from the market rate houses that they're selling. So when inclusionary housing is built on land that the city owns and is selling to somebody else, that's a tax loss, tax increment loss or tax loss, to the people of Alameda. And I want to make sure people understand this, because I don't know about you feel about your housing costs, but so many of these grand subsidized schemes on land, former Navy land that the city will own and sell, are actually paid for by you and me in reduction of the money that we get from the developers. And so if you want to, I personally don't care to contribute to somebody else's shelter costs because I've got enough expenses on my own. So that's what I mean by subsidies. Either have subsidies in the form of reduced return from a developer. In our cases where the developer has put it the bill, but in our case the big developments in the former Navy land, it hasn't happened. So also the Navy on Alameda Point is asking for something like $70,000 for a house that we built, so we've got to subsidize the United States Navy on this land for which we sold it to for $1. I could go on and on about subsidies, but think about it. What produces less than market rate? What makes up the difference between market rate housing and housing that sells for below market rate? There's a subsidy. The money has to come from somewhere.
How right that is. Alameda Point is owned by the Navy. They are now trying to charge us, instead of the revenue neutral amount that we had initially thought of, $108 million. Makes a huge difference. But it is a redevelopment project, and that means that we get a special type of state financing called tax increment financing. And you can sell bonds against expected revenue. You have a designated use for part of this development, and you can estimate what the value of that will be and sell bonds against it. The money that and those bonds can be used for infrastructure, for housing, for other subsidies such as that. And the tax increment money that is generated because the base is being developed, that money wouldn't be there otherwise if it were open space as it is now. The tax increment money that is generated goes to help with some of these costs that Barbara is talking about. In addition, I'm sure the city is looking at other solutions. I'm sitting on a little board where we're developing housing with Habitat, and they're financing half of it. There's state programs that I know the city's development people are looking into. So there's other sources, but they are subsidizing units, and whether it's coming out of the increased tax base at Alameda Point or whether it's coming out of our tax dollars, it is a subsidy, there's no question about it, but it is, in a way, money that we wouldn't have had if the base wasn't being redeveloped. By the way, since the Navy does still own it, if the development is going to occur out there, I've met people who said, we'll just wait people out. We won't let it be green space, open space. That isn't going to be the case. The Navy may not get its $108 million, but it will be trying to auction it off if we don't proceed. And the city's doing an excellent job of trying to achieve all of the community goals in addition to having the base developed. So we need to be encouraging them by saying open space is important, transportation is important. These things are matters. So that's part of the equation as well. Thank you for the question.
Michael? I had a follow-up question on the affordable housing, because I think that a lot of confusion happens when the term affordable housing is used, because that can mean two things. That can mean below market rate housing, which is what Ms. Kerr was just talking about, but it can also mean be used to mean market rate housing that people can afford. And so I wanted to ask, I mean, you already addressed the issues of subsidized housing. What about market rate housing? And in particular, I wanted to ask the question of, I mean, some examples Ms. Kerr gave of some market rate condos and apartments that were expensive. But for the same situation, for the same piece of land, like say those Jack London Square developments have been done as single-family homes, are you contending that they would be exactly the same cost for the market rate units, or would the multiple unit ones be cheaper in the same situation? Like, and I'm not talking about subsidy. I'm saying, you know, I want to buy something, I can't afford a single-family home. A condo should be cheaper. Could you address that issue?
Very simply, what we hear over and over again, that high density equals affordability. And the purpose of my showing those slides was that high density is not necessarily affordable.
I would suggest that maybe that could be the case. It at least gives a variety of housing types to choose from. So if you're not yet ready to buy a big a house, no matter the size, a house, there may be apartments then that could be rented, and they will have to be market rate and market driven. So there is a chance that it's a lot cheaper than paying the costs of a full-sized house on your own. And some of my best friends are apartment dwellers, so I think it's important to be able to have that opportunity.
Yes.
I actually am not very knowledgeable about some of the plans. I know that I'm sorry, speak up. I really can't talk pretty loud. I'm not very knowledgeable about some of the plans that have been offered. I know nothing about. Okay. Thank you. I know nothing about. Is this better? Can you hear me now? Okay. I know nothing about the green space that they're talking about. This is very important to me. I actually have only lived in Alameda about 3 years, although I lived in Rockridge for 10. So I lived in Marina Village, which was has a lot of water space and some green space, quite a bit of grass, and some trees that have caused an awful lot of trouble, but still, they're wonderful. That's why I bought there. And now I live in the best place, which is on the bay in that fill south of Shoreline. And I just have grass and water in front of me, which is about as good as it gets. So nobody is going to be infringing on my space. There's just dirt in front, a dirt path. But the number of people who go by every day is just wonderful to see. The children, the bicycles, the old people, the birders. It's never ending. People are always going, and surely, regardless of what we do over there on Alameda Point, and I'm fascinated by it all because my daughter did teach at Shipman, so I was well aware of the population there before they closed those apartments. I hope they will have a lot of open space. I don't care about the cluster housing, doesn't bother me, but surely you need open space and you need that shoreline to be protected like we did at Marina Village. Thank you. I don't know whether that's a question or a statement. It's a comment.
We welcome everything.
I'll go first.
Well, I would think that Barbara and I agree on that totally.
I think that a lot of people didn't know that in the early days, the East Bay Regional Park System decided they were going to develop that part of Alameda Point near Encinal High School, most of which is city-owned. And their plan for our shoreline was 70% asphalt. And this is not my idea of a shoreline, and we told the East Bay Regional Park it was nobody's idea of a shoreline treatment in Alameda, so they have since come down. But you have to watch, because shoreline is important, and you have to watch it every minute. And even from surprising sources, people can just talk about paving it over. So I agree with you.
There has to be more. Okay.
Well, you don't have to have more. I'll go home now.
I want to ask, I live in a one-story house. I live in a one-story house, but it's a rarity to find a house with a lot of room that's one story. But at some point, we would probably want to be in a smaller house than we have now, one story. Where do you find such a thing anywhere in Alameda now? Our daughter lives in Bayport, and we would like to live near her. There is simply nothing there. We could have bought a two-story house where we could live on one story and just stuff things into the second story. But they're just, I talked with somebody who has some problems walking. They live in a split level now in Alameda. They would like to find a one-story, nothing. And I think that's one of the things that I would hope to come out of the development there.
That's a personal problem. My husband and I live in a house that fit our 3 kids a long time ago. I have brand new knees, so part of my knee problem is alleviated for going upstairs, but there's going to come a time when both of us are going to want to not climb stairs. There's 42 units at Galena Bay in the condos out there, so I watched that real estate market, but yes, this is one of the reasons that we hear from many people that having an opportunity to have that type of diversity in housing opportunities is important. And a small house next to a large one looks nice. It's what makes Alameda's fabric attractive, and hopefully we can replicate that out there. But the current mode that we're on is that developers can only build big houses and use the money to subsidize the housing requirements that they have to meet for low and moderate income. And we need to change both their thinking about that and the economics that make it necessary. So I definitely think you need to keep hovering and reminding us that there's a variety of housing types needed.
I just wanted to point out that one of my slides showed 6 cottages that were individually owned, and with only slightly larger lots, they'd be Measure A compliant. But they actually exist in Alameda now, and they're current selling, as far as I know, for under $300,000, and they all have garages. They're small, there's no doubt about it, but if you're a senior and you want a one-story house, and you don't want to spend a lot of time running up and down stairs or around your house, or they have small front and backyards. And so if you don't want much lawn work, these are available in Alameda, and I don't think people realize that. And my question is, why can't we develop more of these single-story small dwellings at Alameda Point? I've often thought that we need a senior housing development out there so that seniors who live in great big houses in Alameda will vacate them. It's hard to get people to leave Alameda. People move here and stay. It's like the Canadian geese. But their flyaway now is the Alameda flyaway, which is from the golf course to Alameda Point. Well, I'm not way to Marina Village, but other people. But I do think that it would be nice if we put in senior housing. I tried to get senior housing for Marina Cove, couldn't get the votes for it. So that people would move out of their big structures with all those stairs and find a place for seniors to live in Alameda. And I think Alameda Point has great potential for that.
I think Lynn had a question.
Yeah, I have a question. I live in Harbor Bay in a townhouse, and it made me think that the little inn units that are on Garden Island, Islandia buildings, those are very popular, I think, with seniors because they're one story and they're small, but you have a little private space. Did you say that everything that's currently at Harbor Bay is Measure A compliant, or no?
I did not say that.
I said Harbor Bay Island, not Bay Farm Island. Bay Farm Island does have non-Measure A compliant buildings out there.
Because those townhouses were built before 1973.
Yes, before Measure A, and they're not part of Harbor Bay Island. So I was very specific to say Harbor Bay Island. And ask the two Harbor Bay residents over there. They get furious when you start calling.
Harbor Bay, honey.
They get furious and very picky. But the whole peninsula is called Bay Farm Island. But only Harbor Bay Isle was developed under Measure A. But it's very extensive. It's over 3,000 homes.
Mercedes, you had a question?
Not for Barbara, this is for the other things that mentioned affordability and diversity with the housing, and the idea of having people's children live and buy homes, stay in Alameda, etc., or people that want to downsize from their bigger homes to smaller homes. As Barbara pointed out, we have, there's bungalows that are single-story bungalows throughout the island that have been preserved as a result of Measure A. How would removing Measure A to allow development on the point prevent people from outside of Alameda from buying those homes? And what would, when you say remove Measure A, it sounds like you're just talking about Alameda people, the only ones buying the homes. And when you talk about affordability, how do you prevent people buying a home that's affordable and then not turning around and flipping it at a higher market rate, such as the homes that are on the other side? I'm not sure how that would work. I'm trying to understand that.
We can both answer that. The subsidized housing is an equity sharing, and you can't keep all the profit. I don't know what the exact agreements are in each one, but at one point you could get a certain percentage of the profit, and the rest went back to the agency. So to help subsidize the next buyer. But no, you can't flip a subsidized house. Be a great idea if you could. But there are rules that prevent you from cashing in and making a great big fortune on that.
You're absolutely right. And I'm not going to be much more precise than you. I believe there's a 5-year period that you can't sell it and take any profit. And then after that, it is a percentage, I think.
Yeah.
But it's very carefully guarded because the people that are taking those units, and wherever they come from, China or wherever, are entitled to have homes. It's just that we are being very careful to guard the fact that they not make a huge profit over their ownership and the advantage of the depressed market or depressed value of the property. Does that get at your question, Mercedes?
No, I guess then that means there's a 5-year delay on the profitability factor.
It is,
How
no.
long will the affordability here? That's what I'm not understanding.
Leave me your phone number and I'll get you precisely, and I'll give it to the club too, what that period is. But it's a very small amount for the first 15 years or so that anyone can take money out of it.
I have a question before having low. I'm trying to understand the restrictions. You said there's like the lot size restriction, and I drive past that. There's that building. They're building these. It looks like 2 large homes. They're building 2 large homes on a lot on Fernside. You know what I'm talking about? So I guess I'm not understanding how Measure A allows these 2 huge homes, which are bigger than mine on a lot, that just doesn't really support 2 homes. I mean, that's not really a controversy. I'm just trying to understand. You know which one I'm talking about?
The requirement is that you have to have 2,000 square foot lot.
Okay.
And if you go measure those 2 lots, they're probably 2,000 square feet each.
Okay.
And if you go to Bay Farm Island, or not Bay Farm Island, but go to Bayport, you'll see a lot of large homes on very small lots.
It just doesn't look right.
It doesn't look like the rest of Alameda.
No. I just wanted to point out that the standard lot size in our zoning code, if you check Chapter 30 of the AMC, is 5,000 square feet. But unfortunately, Measure A has been used in kind of the reverse to say, well, anything over 2,000 square feet is okay. It's not really okay. It doesn't fit the rest of Alameda. Our standard lot size in our zoning code is 5,000 square feet. And the variances flutter down from the planning board like snow in Minnesota in the winter. And I think perhaps it's time to start. I don't think it looks right either.
I think Ray, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, I have two questions. I live in Marina Village, and I think that by most standards it's considered a successful redevelopment project. And it does offer a diversity of homes. They don't all look different, but there are level-in first, homes for people who might be older, two-bedroom units that are not that large. They are somewhat, I guess, it depends on what your definition of affordability is these days. But they have that. They have upper units. They have townhouse units. And so there are, and they are Measure A compliant. So because it's been so successful as a multi-use development also, I wonder why it's never been replicated in the city and why it isn't being considered as a model to be played with, whether or not Measure A passes or doesn't pass. It would certainly offer housing choices, it seems to me. So that's my first question.
May I go ahead
Please,
and comment
sure.
on that and allow Barbara to before you?
Sure.
I personally do regard that as a very successful development. The ability to live and walk a few blocks to work is
And
just
shopping.
exactly.
And open space.
Exactly. But there also is a lot of population that counts into that allows the economics of that to work. There's also a good transit system that people can leave and go to other jobs. It works splendidly because there's a diversity of housing to draw on around Marina Village. And it is a model that we should be looking at to see if we can replicate, because there's huge amounts of commercial space to be developed at Alameda Point, huge amounts. I mean, like more than we have on the whole island. And so it's going to be a challenge for any developer to use those buildings or use that space. And so they are going to be wanting to find ways to attract people that will work in the area and not be driving to and from the site. So Marina Village, in my opinion, makes an excellent model, but we also need to consider its environment.
Also close to the Marina Village Business Park is an older section that's zoned R2, and it does have affordable housing market rate. So I think that we should not neglect the good supply of affordable housing along our north waterfront, which has front yards, backyards, good place to raise kids. And so we shouldn't just look at new development. And by the way, I agree with most people on the appearance of Bayport. Measure A compliant though it may be, a lot of its dullness is due to the fact that there are people who insist on straight streets and only right angles. And they miss the natural traffic calming benefits of curved streets. For example, in a recent planning board meeting, they were talking about a proposed development out in Harbor Bay Business Park, but it was going to be zoned residential. And the planning board members, of course, objected to the airplane noise, but also they were having big fits about the curved streets. And curved streets, as I said, are a very respectable traffic calming method. And so that we need to be a little more flexible in our design of future residential projects in Alameda. And for example, a lot of the East End isn't a grid pattern. So we've got various kinds of development in Alameda, And I think Bayport is a horrible example. And I was very disappointed when the Central Park, the big park, was essentially given over to the school district. So now it's just barren grass with a couple of baseball diamonds on it. There's one tiny little small children's play park. But there's 3 trees, but there are no trees in the park. Can you imagine a park? I'm getting on my soapbox here. This is my open space soapbox. But there are no barbecue areas, it's not a gathering place. And our city park should be gathering place. And come closer to my neighborhood, also not too far, is Little John Park. The barbecue pits and tables there are used every weekend by everybody. And the popularity of that shows that we have a shortage of gathering spaces in our park system. And to see the Bayport Park go in, to be nothing but another couple ball fields for the school district just broke my heart. But I only had 1 vote.
Ray, did you have a...
I
had a second question.
Well, I sort of did, but I think you sort of, what I was wondering is, when you were speaking, Helen, you were talking about the fact that what you envision for the point is almost, in a sense, a self-sustaining community where people will work and live, an integrated community, and that jobs will be available close to home, and that therefore, that will alleviate to some degree the transportation issues that are kind of crucial. And I just wondered if that, in fact, would be a reality, that just changing Measure A, does that really ensure that there will be enough jobs there to factor in with the transportation concerns, and whether, in fact, those jobs will be taken by the people who live there? You see, I mean, a lot of people who live there may not really be interested in the kind of commercial enterprises that are normally retail shops and things like that. And so then we would have people maybe coming in from other areas to work there, in addition to the people who are living there and don't want those kinds of jobs and are leaving the island. And here we are at Marina Village with the tube as our entrance and exit to the island. So I sort of wonder whether just changing Measure A is going to solve all those issues. I would love to see an integrated community, and a neighborhood plan where people